Theranos began with a simple, powerful story. A young founder, Elizabeth Holmes, said she could transform medical testing by using only a tiny finger prick sample instead of traditional blood draws. The vision sounded humane, modern, and efficient. Faster results, easier access, and a future where routine lab work could feel as convenient as a quick checkup. In Silicon Valley, that kind of narrative can attract attention very quickly, especially when it blends technology, healthcare, and social impact. As the company gained momentum, the public message grew bolder. Theranos suggested it had built a breakthrough device, often associated with the name Edison, capable of running a wide menu of tests from a very small amount of blood. The company's valuation and reputation rose alongside those claims, and the founder became a symbol of innovation in many headlines and events. But the more the stories spread, the more the company depended on the story staying consistent. When a brand becomes a promise, any crack in that promise becomes an urgent threat. Behind the scenes, however, the situation was more complicated. Healthcare is an unforgiving domain because almost correct is not good enough. Tests must meet strict standards for accuracy, consistency, validation, and quality control. In technology startups, it's normal to iterate. In clinical diagnostics, iteration must be carefully controlled, documented, and proven before it reaches real-world use. That gap between startup tempo and medical rigor became one of the central tensions in the Theranos saga. What makes Theranos especially instructive as an educational case is that it was not just a story of a product that struggled. It became a story about how certainty was communicated before certainty existed. Over time, critics and later legal findings argued that investors were given an overly optimistic picture of what the technology could do and how ready it truly was. A company can believe in its mission and still be obligated to speak precisely about its current capabilities, especially when raising money or partnering with large institutions. Theranos' rise also reveals how social proof can amplify confidence. When influential people sit on boards, when reputable names appear nearby, when a startup looks polished and mission driven, the outside world may assume that the underlying science has been fully verified. Yet reputation is not the same as validation. In this case, the company's image and messaging often moved faster than the evidence the public could independently review. By 2015, investigative reporting began to challenge the narrative. The Wall Street Journal published reporting that raised serious questions about whether Theranos' technology was performing as claimed and how widely it was being used for the menu of tests the company offered. That reporting mattered because it shifted the story from a visionary startup changing healthcare to a company whose claims may not match operational reality. The conflict between marketing certainty and scientific proof moved into the open, and once that happens in healthcare, every earlier statement is re-examined under a brighter light. After the public questions intensified, the Theranos story became less about a glamorous future and more about verification. In clinical testing, does it work is never a single question. It becomes many questions. Does it work across different sample types, across different conditions, across different users? Is it reproducible? Are errors detected? Are results comparable to established methods? Can regulators review the validation data and see a clear chain of evidence? Reporting and later enforcement actions described a troubling mismatch between what was said publicly and what was happening operationally. One theme that emerged in coverage was that Theranos sometimes relied on conventional lab instruments for at least part of its testing, rather than running everything on its own devices, despite the impression that its proprietary technology was doing the heavy lifting. This distinction is important for a documentary narrative because it shows how the claim and the workflow can diverge. A company might still be building its own system while using established tools as a bridge, yet the ethical line is crossed if outsiders are led to believe the proprietary device is already delivering results at scale when it is not. Theranos' partnerships also became part of the story. A relationship with the major retail pharmacy chain helped place the brand closer to everyday consumers and gave the appearance of readiness and trust. In healthcare, distribution implies reliability. People naturally assume that if something is offered in a mainstream setting, it has passed meaningful checks. But later accounts described regulatory and operational challenges that undermined the sense that the system was stable enough for broad use. Regulators and oversight bodies play a critical role here. In the United States, healthcare testing is influenced by multiple layers of oversight: federal and state regulators, laboratory accreditation expectations, and quality standards. When questions arise, the response must be evidence-based, calm, and transparent. In the Theranos case, the overall arc moved toward investigations and enforcement scrutiny, reflecting how seriously healthcare claims are treated when accuracy is in doubt. For the audience, the lesson is not never trust innovation. The lesson is that healthcare innovation must earn trust through verification. A tech demo is not a clinical product. A confident pitch is not a peer-reviewed validation. When a company speaks in absolutes without releasing strong support, it invites a dangerous form of belief that bypasses proof. As the company tried to defend its narrative, the controversy became a conflict of accountability. Who gets to check the claims? Who gets access to the data? What standards must be met before deployment? In many industries, these questions are negotiable. In medical diagnostics, they are not. The story's educational value lies in how it shows the cost of blurred boundaries between prototype and product, between aspiration and current capability, between brand storytelling and scientific reporting. Once those boundaries blur, even well-intended teams can make choices that later appear indefensible. And when the stakes involve health, the demand for clarity becomes even stronger. A pivotal chapter in the Theranos narrative was investigative journalism, particularly the Wall Street Journal's reporting starting in 2015. In a documentary tone, this moment is best understood as the point where outside verification pushed against inside messaging. Investigative reporting does not replace scientific review, but it can expose inconsistencies that regulators, investors, and partners then examine more formally. As questions spread, Theranos faced pressure from multiple directions at once. Investors wanted reassurance, partners wanted operational clarity, regulators wanted documentation. Employees, especially those closer to testing realities, found themselves in an environment where the public story and internal experience did not always align. In organizations under intense scrutiny, the internal culture often becomes decisive. Does leadership encourage reality-based reporting upward, or does it reward loyalty to the narrative? In 2018, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission announced charges related to claims that Theranos and Holmes misled investors while raising large sums of money, and the SEC described a settlement with Holmes that included a monetary penalty and a ban from serving as an officer or director of a public company for a period of time, among other terms. This regulatory action matters because it frames the case not simply as a startup that failed, but as alleged deception in the fundraising context, where accuracy is a legal requirement, not a preference. The SEC's language and documentation emphasize a core idea. When money is raised based on specific representations, those representations must be true, supportable, and not materially misleading. In high-growth startup culture, founders can slip into speaking about the future as if it already exists, especially when they feel that the product is almost there. But securities law draws a firm line. Optimism cannot be presented as completed fact. Around the same period, public attention expanded beyond investors to the broader system of healthcare trust. When a medical company's claims are questioned, the concern isn't only financial. It touches confidence in diagnostics, confidence in clinical partnerships, and confidence that innovation is being introduced responsibly. A careful educational framing is to show how the collapse of trust typically happens in layers. First, doubt appears in a few places: an article, a whistleblower account, a skeptical regulator. Then, more stakeholders request evidence. If evidence is incomplete, explanations become more complicated. Complication can look like evasion. Evasion accelerates suspicion. Eventually, suspicion becomes an official process: investigations, legal filings, and court proceedings. Theranos became globally known not only because of the original promise, but because the promise was presented with striking certainty. Once the certainty was questioned by credible institutions and reporting, the company's entire identity was put on trial in the court of public credibility long before any courtroom verdict. As legal scrutiny intensified, the Theranos story entered the criminal justice system. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of California later summarized the case and the sentencing outcome for Elizabeth Holmes, stating she received a federal prison sentence in November 2022 for defrauding investors in Theranos. This transition from press controversy to criminal conviction and sentencing marks a major shift in how society categorizes the behavior, from misjudgment to fraud proven beyond reasonable doubt, based on the findings of the court process. In 2025, a U.S. appeals court upheld convictions and related outcomes involving Holmes and Theranos' former president, Ramesh Sunny Balwani, reinforcing the durability of the trial results under appellate review. That matters for an educational documentary because appeals are designed to test whether the process was fair and lawful. When convictions are upheld, the story becomes less about competing narratives and more about an established legal record. Balwani's role is also part of the larger story arc. Public summaries and court coverage reflect that he was convicted and sentenced as well, and that restitution was ordered in connection with the case. In documentary terms, this reinforces that corporate accountability is rarely a one-person story. High-impact misrepresentation tends to involve leadership dynamics, shared decision-making, and coordinated messaging. The deeper lesson for audiences is how fraud is evaluated in practice. It is not simply the technology failed. Technologies fail often. The legal focus centers on what was claimed, what was known internally, what was communicated externally, and how money or trust was obtained on the basis of those communications. In short, intent and representation matter. If a leader makes claims about performance, deployment, contracts, or validation that are materially misleading, and others rely on those claims, the harm becomes legally significant. Theranos also illustrates how a founder's personal brand can become intertwined with the company's fundraising power. When the founder's identity becomes the product, visionary, disciplined, unstoppable, Skepticism can feel socially difficult, even when it is rational. This is why strong governance matters. Boards and advisors must be able to challenge the story with evidence demands, not simply celebrate the mission. For an educational narrative, it is also important to maintain a calm tone. This case is a study in accountability, not spectacle. The purpose of revisiting it is to understand how systems failed, diligence failures, verification gaps, governance blind spots, and an internal culture that did not consistently align claims with proof. The end of this chapter is not just a sentence. It is a societal signal that healthcare claims and investor communications have boundaries, and crossing those boundaries carries consequences. A question viewers often ask is, how did this become so big before being stopped? The most realistic answer is that trust is built from many small signals: a confident founder, an elegant design language, a mission that feels morally urgent, high profile supporters, impressive looking partnerships. Each signal seems reasonable on its own, but together they can create a powerful assumption. Surely this has been verified. Theranos exploited, intentionally or through a culture that rewarded certainty, an environment where storytelling can sometimes substitute for proof, at least temporarily. The company's messaging offered a clean, hopeful narrative: modern diagnostics for everyone. In an attention economy, clean narratives travel faster than complex explanations of validation studies, measurement error, and clinical comparability. This is where the educational value deepens. The case highlights a structural weakness. Many non-experts, including smart investors, struggle to evaluate technical medical claims. If you cannot independently test a device, you must rely on governance, documentation, regulators, and credible third parties. If those safeguards are weakened, belief can spread faster than truth can catch it. Public accounts and official actions describe that investor fundraising was influenced by claims about technology readiness and performance. That means trust became financial capital. Once trust becomes capital, a company's incentives can shift. Protecting the narrative can feel like protecting survival itself. And if survival is framed as for the mission, then ethically questionable choices can be rationalized as necessary steps toward a greater good. Theranos also reveals the problem of secrecy. Startups often guard intellectual property, but in healthcare, secrecy cannot replace validation. When a company repeatedly asks the world to trust it while limiting the world's ability to verify, suspicion naturally grows. This does not mean all secrecy is wrongdoing. It means secrecy must be balanced with credible evidence channels. Inside the organization, trust dynamics become even more intense. Employees may worry that speaking up will be misunderstood. leaders may interpret skepticism as disloyalty. Over time, the company can develop an echo chamber. People repeat the strongest version of the story because that version is rewarded. Reality becomes inconvenient, and inconvenient information is pushed aside. This part of the documentary story should feel human, not harsh. Many people involved likely wanted to believe. Belief is not stupidity. It is often hope paired with incomplete information. The Theranos lesson is that hope must be partnered with verification, especially when health is involved. Theranos remains one of the most cited modern examples of technology hype colliding with clinical truth. The lasting educational value is not to discourage innovation, but to refine the rules of trust. First, the case teaches that extraordinary claims require ordinary discipline, documented validation, transparent methodology as appropriate, reproducibility, and quality systems. In healthcare, the bar is high because the consequences of error are serious, even when language remains calm and non sensational. Innovation must be patient enough to prove itself. Second, it demonstrates that governance must be real, not symbolic. Boards need members who can ask hard questions and insist on evidence. Auditors, advisors, and partners need the courage to pause a rollout when verification is incomplete. When governance becomes ceremonial, charismatic storytelling can fill the empty space. Third, it highlights why journalism and regulators matter as external reality checks. The Wall Street Journal's investigation altered the trajectory by forcing contradictions into daylight. Regulatory actions, such as the SEC's case and settlement terms, reinforced that investor communications are not marketing copy, they are accountable statements. And the criminal case, followed by sentencing and upheld convictions on appeal, reinforced that the system can impose consequences when deception is proven. Fourth, the story teaches a practical viewing skill. Listen for the difference between we are working on and we can do, between we plan to and we already have, between a prototype exists and a validated clinical product is deployed. These distinctions sound small, but they are the line between vision and verified reality. Finally, Theranos offers a cultural lesson for the modern tech era. We should celebrate ambition without treating ambition as proof. We should admire founders without turning founders into unquestionable symbols. We should love big ideas while still demanding the humble work of evidence. In documentary terms, the ending is not just downfall, it is a blueprint for better safeguards. The Theranos story invites a more mature innovation culture, one where optimism and accountability can coexist, where claims are tested before they are amplified, and where trust is earned in public, step by step, through proof rather than promise.